This is something else we did at GC. I was going to mention at some point, but we started making face shields using 3D printers. And so we made the headband. And
That's good.
Plastic. So it's our health clinic needed some, and then we started just making them, and now we've got about 2,000 of them.
Fantastic.
Wow. How's the clarity of the shield part?
Yeah, it's good. This one's been beat up a little bit because it's our demo, but yeah, it's good. They're just using a piece of acrylic, or I don't know if it's acrylic, but it's some type of sheet plastic that they just cut out. And so these parts here are.
Oh, you're not printing the shield.
Yeah, not this part, not the shield, but the headband and this band here to kind of stabilize it.
I see.
Yeah,
I believe
that's the Prusa model. I've seen a few different.
Yes, that's right.
Around. Yeah,
yep.
And,
We have a group at Penn making those too. Not that exact model, but.
Yeah, the face shield, the plastic portion, I think, is usually either laser cut from PETG sheets, or it can be die struck if you have a die anvil for a large production company. I was part of a COVID innovation PPE group for a while through NGH and Brigham Women's, and they had a really smart idea where they were working with a manufacturing facility that created food industry plastics. And of course, that's great, right? They have really high production volume, they work with plastics, and they're already ISO certified in a sterile environment, and doing a pivot into a medical sterility environment is really great. So they have anvils and pelletized PETG that they can turn into sheets, and I could pump out. I think the group worked on doing an origami principle face mask. That was one sheet that could be tesslated and then folded and met all the specifications for wearing a respirator underneath it, and they could pump out something like 100,000 of those a day, which is really, really neat. I don't know exactly where the group ended up, but that was sort of the leading plan when I left it.
That's amazing.
Great, and with that, we're going to get started here. So thank you everybody for joining us for today's webinar. This is the BioRAFT EHS Community Webinar Series, and today we're going to be talking about ramp up and reopening checklists, how to anticipate needs with so many places opening up. We've got Kimi Brown, Michael Engle, Craig Merlic, and Jennifer Ramil here with us today. My name is Matt Siegel. I am your host, and I work here at BioRAFT. And just to get things started, we're going to do a quick round the horn to introduce everybody, get you familiar with their names and faces. It sounds like there may be some slight delays on the video presenter, so please just be a little patient with Zoom as it struggles to keep up with the pace of our conversation. And then we're going to dive right into talking about our phase-in plans. So Kimi, do you want to just say hi?
Sure, hi. I'm Kimi Brown. I'm a senior laboratory safety specialist at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I work for environmental health and radiation safety, so EHS.
Great. Michael, you want to just go down the line here?
Sure. So Michael Engle, I'm the Director of Environmental Health and Safety and Emergency Management at Grand Canyon University, and glad to be here.
And this is Craig Merlic, and I'm a professor of chemistry and biochemistry at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. I'm also the executive director of the UC Center for Laboratory Safety, and I serve on a number of campus safety committees at UCLA.
I'm Jennifer Ramil. I'm the Research Safety Services Manager and Biosafety Officer at San Diego State University.
All right, fantastic. And as I mentioned earlier, Matt Siegel, I'll be your MC, and I work here at BioRAFT. And as you can see, my headshot is, like I think many of these, not really respective of my own new quarantine haircut. So I think it's aging pretty well, and definitely glad to be able to take care of that myself and keep people safe there. So let's, without any further ado, get started. So we're going to have each of our panelists do a quick run through of their organization's phase-in plans to give context for the later discussion. We're going to ask a few questions of our panelists, and then we're going to transition to a live Q&A about 30 to 40 minutes into this discussion, depending on how everything goes and what's being asked. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Jen.
Hi, everyone. So like I said, I'm the Research Safety Services Manager and Biosafety Officer at San Diego State University. And just a quick disclaimer that the information that I'm sharing, completely my own opinion, does not represent San Diego State or the CSU, California State University system in any way. So as the Research Safety Services Manager throughout this pandemic, I've been meeting multiple times a week with our Department of Graduate Research Affairs, our VP of Research, our Research Foundation, and we've been talking about navigating communication, policies and guidelines, and now repopulation. So our research, or our repopulation plan, our research ramp-up plan is a little complicated because San Diego State is part of the California State University system, which is a network of 23 campuses up and down the state of California. And while we have one of the larger research programs in the CSU system, our ramp-up plan, our research repopulation plan, has to be in line with the whole CSU system. And as you can see from that map there, every one of our campuses are in different counties. All of those counties are in different phases of their back to normal. So I think we're close to a final plan, but I just wanted to show like just the complicatedness of bringing our researchers back, not just from like our perspective of how to keep them safe, but also like all of the policies and clearances that we have to get. So Matt, if you would go to the next slide, I just wanted to share a little bit of what we have been doing during this research pause. And like I said, I think that we are close to a final plan, and I think it's going to look very similar to the ones that you'll see coming up next. But Environmental Health and Safety has been conducting research pause inspections just to identify hazards that were left behind as everyone quickly left campus. And then what do we have to manage prior to repopulation? So during our research pause inspections, some things that we've noticed are, we've identified which labs need eye wash station and safety shower flushings, which labs have like hazardous chemical waste that was left behind and might be overdue to leave campus, biohazardous waste disposal that needs to get taken care of. And we're really planning on just taking care of all of this for the labs before they come back. And then we've also planned on taking care of like some fume hood malfunctions and some biosafety cabinet certifications so that that's not something that our researchers have to deal with. They can just get right to work. Our plan will consist of research leaders. I don't say principal investigators because this might be funded, unfunded PIs, or research leaders. It might include wet lab scientists. It might include engineering, theater, performance arts, all of these things. So we're calling them research leaders, and they are all going to be responsible for submitting a plan to identify how they're going to establish social distancing, their disinfection plans, identifying their high touch points, what disinfectants they're planning on using, and how they're going to spaces that they might be sharing with their colleagues. Each research leader and each person who is approved to come back to campus, when that's allowed, will be submitting an acknowledgement form of responsibility so that they know what's being expected of them, and really to kind of put into place this idea that being back on campus is really a privilege because not everyone is allowed back right now. And we want to be mindful of making sure that we treat like that privilege with respect. And then what Environmental Health and Safety is doing is we're creating checklists, restart checklists. That's going to be based on the type of space that people will be occupying. So whether that's art, theater, workshop, our engineering labs, our biology wet labs, our chemistry labs, things like that. So very specialized checklists to kind of get people in the mindset of really taking care of their spaces. And that's our plan.
Okay, great. Thank you for that quick overview there, and I'll kick it on over to Craig.
All right, thank you, Matt. So I'll be speaking about UCLA, and just again to set it in perspective as Jennifer did, UCLA is one of 10 University of California campuses, but I actually like to say that it's a unified system with 10 campuses, and each campus has a very large moat around it. So each campus is independent, and UCLA is coming up with plans that are similar but different from Berkeley, San Francisco, etc. So for UCLA, we have established multiple key committees dealing with the COVID-19 response. And I've served on a committee specifically looking at both research ramp down, I thought a few months ago, and now research ramp up. And so we've produced guidelines and documentation for research ramp up. And for the benefit of the attendees, I'm actually going to be posting these materials online. So either at the Center for Laboratory Safety, or I also try to share it with Matt and BioRAFT. So shown on this slide are some of the overall principles and guidelines for our ramp up. So first off, we have guiding principles that everyone must follow, in particular following state, local, national public health directives, protecting the mental and physical health and safety of the research workforce, and then conducting the research activities to mitigate risk of contracting the disease. So like a number of other places, we have a phased plan for ramping up research. So we're currently in phase 1, and this is the safer at home phase. Although I will admit that since UCLA is a major research institution, we do have a significant number of labs doing COVID-19 related research currently on campus. Beginning approximately June 1st, although this is not finalized yet, we're going to be moving into phase 2, where we have ultra low density of research activities. The goal is to have less than or equal to 25% of the normal density. This would be ideally building wide in each of the research buildings. And we've come up with a guideline of 250 square feet per person. We can address that later in the Q&A portion. And then at some point in the future, we'll move to phase 3, and transitions between each of the phases is controlled by the chancellor and executive vice chancellor. And then at some point in the hopefully not too far distant future would be phase 4, start to return to full research operations under the new normal. And then at every stage, we have the requirement for researchers to be able to ramp down research. So if there's an order that we need to ramp down research, then researchers need to have that plan in mind. So in the next slide, I show some of the process. So similar to what Jennifer just talked about, each PI is going to be preparing and submitting a research operational plan. And UCLA is a rather complex organization. So when I say PI, I will be including faculty and directors of institutes and directors of core laboratories, service laboratories, shops, things like that. So we can, but I'll probably just say PI. Then, and I'll talk a little bit more about that the contents of the plan in a second. Then when they submit the plan, it'll be submitted to the chair, who conducts a review of the plan and approves or rejects it. Then it goes to a divisional dean, who will review the plan and approve or reject it. And that will be the final approval. And the chair and dean are going to be looking for appropriate distancing and low density, and taking a more global look because individual PIs may not be aware of all the plans of people within the building that they're in. And then we have a mechanism for appeals through the Vice Chancellor of Research. So key to this are the research operational plans, and we've detailed the guidelines in a 30 or more page document. And then we've, for the campus, have provided a template to guide the PIs and structure their input. So the template has about 20 points that the PIs must address to make sure that we have safe return to operations. But all along, we have a number of recommendations, such as really, we only want personnel with the need to access physical locations to be on site. So computational research groups are fully functional via remote work, but it's the wet labs that we're very concerned about, and studios and other performance areas. We want the PIs to give serious thought to prioritizing personnel and operations, and there's a lot of considerations that go into that. There are issues about graduating students, students leaving for jobs and needing to finish up work, considerations of people who have underlying health considerations. And so we leave it to the PIs, we try to give them guidance on that. And then there's a lot of consideration about the campus core facilities and also the need for addressing community and field research. It turns out that we have lots of lots of researchers on campus who do field studies, either in other countries or in the greater Southern California region. And so these research operational plans need to address their plans as well as the laboratories physically on campus. Okay, so that gives sort of a rough overview. And as I said, the research operational plan, or ROP, has about 20 points in it, and it's quite detailed, and tries to address the complexity of a major research university. And we had originally thought about having maybe 6 different templates, one for wet labs, one for studios, one for computational research, one for field work, and one for clinical and human subjects work. But we ended up having one more generalized form and made it workable for all researchers on campus.
Great. Hey, Greg, I'm going to have to cut you off there just quickly because we are already 20 minutes in here and want to make sure we've got enough time for Kimi and Jen. So would you like to wrap up anything up before you finish?
No, that was good.
Okay, great. Thank you for all that. I mean, this is a lot to condense into small time, so I appreciate all the work here. Right. Kimi, would you mind detailing Penn's plan?
I would be happy to. Before I get to my slides, though, I just wanted to start out by saying thank you to this community for continuing to show up for each other right now, even though we're all dealing with our own professional and personal and general existential issues. I'm on, like, I don't know, going into month 3 of lockdown, and I felt very supported and connected through this time. So thank you, Matt and BioRAFT, for hosting these webinars and inviting us to contribute in this way. And on that note, I also want to give you all a heads up about another resource related to today's topic that will be available soon. So those of you who are SHEMA members may already know about this, but SHEMA has convened a task force. It's condensing all of the back to research checklists and plans that have been shared in their forums into one, like, detailed corpus that we can then all reference. So I'm mentioning this project because I am a humble task force member. There's 5 of us, and we're led by Jeff Lewin of Michigan Technological University. We expect to be able to share this mega checklist in the near future, probably first week of June. And I think Matt has said he's willing to help distribute it because it will be made publicly available. So keep an eye out for that. I also have a quick disclaimer that today I might reference some Penn policies and decisions. I may also express some of my own opinions. The Venn diagram of those has a lot of overlap, not necessarily 100%. So I will try to let you know which circle I'm speaking from as needed. Okay, now we can get into our phase-in plan. So actually, it sounds like very similar to UCLA's in a lot of ways. So I'm just doing a very high-level treatment here. We have 4 distinct phases. This underlying graphic outlined in the black box is from our Research Resumption Strategy Master Plan. I'm going to refer to that as the master plan. So this plan was developed by a task force that was assembled by our Vice Provost of Research. So at our institution, this was not an EHS crafted plan. And our current situation is this ramp down phase. So that's high priority COVID-19 related research only. Now, when I made these slides, which was just like 2 days ago, we did not yet have a date for the start of phase 1. As of yesterday, we know now that phase 1 will be starting, at least to some degree, on June 1st. So in Pennsylvania, our regions of the state have been assigned different colors based on risk level. So the southeast region of the state, which includes Philadelphia, is still designated as red. In short, that means we're under a stay-at-home order and only life-sustaining businesses may operate. We will not be upgraded to yellow status until we've sustained 2 weeks with less than 50 new cases per 100,000 people in our region, and we're not there yet. So I had thought when I made these slides that we were going to start phase 1 and ramp up to 20% of our normal population density in research when Philadelphia turned yellow. That has not happened yet. The state hasn't changed our status. So I don't know. Maybe if you ask me about this again next week, I might have more information and understand better what the trigger is. But this is new information, and I think this story is probably familiar to a lot of people. So that's all I'll say about that. Regardless, the upshot here between phases, what we're calling 1 and 2, is that if everyone behaves themselves really well in phase 1, then we will be able to ramp up to about not to exceed 50% of our normal population density. That decision will not be made by EHS, and I just think it's a smart idea that we're starting with a smaller set of people and testing out our procedures and piloting that. You can see here the master plan says we're also going to shut down anyone who can't handle the responsibility. So then when we get the green light, we'll move up to 100% of our research operations, but of course with a new awareness of hygiene and hygiene practices as the norm. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just more details about the phases. Basically, the only difference between phase 1 and phase 2 is the number of people and how we're handling shared offices. So if you're wondering how it's going to be decided who is among the 20 and 50% who are allowed to come back to campus, basically that's being decided by the schools. The master plan has some guiding principles for prioritizing, but we can go ahead to the next slide. The schools will be responsible for developing their own plans, and then any of the labs that want to return to campus, they're going to have to submit a plan to the school, including their justification for why they should be prioritized and also their lab-specific safety plan. EHS is not making those approvals or reviewing those submissions. That's at the school level. But I do note here that I expect that most of these lab-specific plans will really just be referencing the guidance that our office has published in order to describe how they're managing their risks. So that's what we are doing as of 3:24 p.m. on May 21st. It's important to timestamp these things.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Fantastic. And let's get over to, last but certainly not least, Michael, to talk about GCU's plans for reopening.
So hello, everyone. So at Grand Canyon University, we're similar to the other universities with our reopen plans, but maybe the big difference being is that we're not quite as large of a research university. So our main focus has been on an overall plan for the university. And as you can see here, we're really focusing our efforts on really still coming up with the final details of the plan. And so a lot of our efforts have been having our senior leadership come together. And from an EHS standpoint, our biggest task has been to try to influence and help our leadership determine, okay, what are those best steps as we move forward. And so some of the guiding principles that we've been able to influence and help all the different programs and departments say what are the things that are most important. Obviously cleaning and disinfecting. How are we going to do that? What does that look like? Are we going to do face masks required? What does physical distancing really look like? How is that going to work? And then looking at also how we're going to protect our most vulnerable students, faculty, and staff. And I know that's something that's on everybody's mind. And how do you do that? How does that look? So obviously working with HR for our staff and faculty, but how does that look when it comes to students when they're in their, do we put them in a separate dorm? Do we, what measures do we take? We're also looking, obviously, how do we minimize contact at activities and events as at many universities, right? The students really like to congregate. They like to get together. They like, in their rooms, wherever they are at. So how do we help influence that? And we're looking towards training and education. We're looking at how do we use our internal communication channels to influence and help. We're looking at how do we use students to help with peer pressure versus it coming from faculty or staff or even our public safety department. How can we engage our student workers, for example? Obviously, a big factor that I think everybody's looking at is, how do we quickly identify cases? How do we make sure that students feel comfortable reporting? And then what's the plan afterward for quarantine and isolation? Telehealth is proving to be a really breakthrough for us. And so we've got a strong telehealth system we rapidly set up. We have a hotline, and we're getting testing set up as well. And so when we're looking at employee health and safety, it's been actually pretty interesting. A lot of our members of our staff, they can monitor that activity and that productivity, and they've actually had more productivity since they've started telehealth or telework, working from home, than when they were working here. So it seems like the telework is going to be something that will continue into the future. So really these kind of principles and checklists that we're creating are being sent out to each program, similar to the other panelists have said, for them to kind of come up with their plan and to operate within those parameters. So it's really about just empowering them and then coming up with innovative solutions. Really not a lot of tops-down approach here. It's more just we're all working together as we all would to figure out how to best proceed. And so that's the gist of it.
All right, great. Well, first off, before we move on to our second portion of the webinar, where we'll ask our panelists a few directed questions, just a big thank you to everyone for going through these so quickly and all of the work that went into getting these slides together and detailing your plans so quickly to give us time for these, longer conversations. So, sorry, Michael, I'm actually going to kick this first question back to you. And if anybody you see me looking over here to my left, at least I have these questions up on my computer, so that's why. And Michael, I was wondering how quickly, considering how quickly the COVID landscape changes, what have you been doing to manage the challenge of planning now for an uncertain future? Could you provide any specific successes our audience may be able to use for their own success?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges we've kind of overcome and has really been around just being the aspect of perseverance. As we started, everybody was rapidly trying to figure out how to respond and switch to online and shut down the campus, get students off campus. A lot of it started turning into planning, and it was just being just staying the course and realizing the planning process takes time. Your first plan always seems to fail, and so you just have to kind of trust that you're going to get through this together, and knowing that from an EHS standpoint, persevering and having a good friend that you can vent to when you're trying to influence the senior leadership and they start going a different direction, but trusting that it'll come back around. And that has seemed to be the case. The more that we just continue to be their influence, we've seen senior leadership kind of come back around to where we originally were trying to get them to go in the first place. So you just got to stick to it, and that's it's a tough challenge.
Yeah, I've definitely found in my own work here that there's a certain point where any decision becomes the right decision, and you can't let the perfect get in the way of being the very good, especially in this sort of uncertain landscape.
Exactly.
Great. Kimi, next one is here for you. So I was wondering, as folks figure out how ramping up and reopening lab operations will go, a big question on everyone's minds is the use of face masks inside and outside the lab. How do you plan to address or work around this issue? It looks like as well there are a few questions about these. People wondering who will be supplying these face masks. Of course, the material, the build, the construction are all questions that people are interested in. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks. This is a big one. I want to give some background on this issue at Penn. We're following the Pennsylvania Department of Health requirements for the duration of our county's red and yellow phases. So we're mandating masks or CDC compliant face coverings at all times inside all of our buildings, except when you're eating or if you're the sole occupant of a private office. And that's true even while physical distancing. So that's the environment that we're working in. So by extension of that, we must require that masks are going to be worn in the labs. Of course, then, researchers are already asking us, is that safe to be wearing something on our face in the labs? And the first question I'm hearing on this is actually, are the masks flammable? And no, but most of them probably are combustible, right? So right now, there is a surgical style disposable but reusable mask that is probably going to be the one initially provided by the schools, and our vendor is sending me a sample of that. So I am literally going to try to set fire to it just to see what happens. That experiment is shaping up to be the highlight of my week next week. So we'll see. I expect it'll burn. It's not supposed to be non-flammable, but let's see. So we're also vetting some cloth face coverings. Those will most likely be 100% cotton. That is also a requirement we have for our lab coats. So still combustible, but it's not going to melt to your face. And then based on a risk assessment, if there is a higher fire risk, like some task or material that normally would necessitate an FR lab coat, then we will offer an alternative option. So I'm working on getting information right now and samples of an FR mask, a fire resistant mask, to approve. I think there will actually be very few situations that really warrant this. But I want to be able to recommend a product instead of just dismissing this question as an outlier situation. I find that people really don't like when you do that. So that's mainly why I'm looking into it. And then the Pennsylvania Department of Health does say that an employee does not need to wear a mask if it impedes their vision or creates an unsafe condition. So with that in mind, another option that we have published as an approved alternative is to wear a face shield temporarily while in the lab instead of a face mask, but we put some restrictions on this. The shields don't provide as much, containment, source containment as the masks. So we've only approved these for while working at the hood or anywhere where the mask could definitely create an unsafe condition. So it's not permitted anywhere else in the building, just the labs. And we do have a recommendation for a face shield product that's, reusable and durable and not one of the flimsy disposable kinds. So that's just the fire question. Another question I'm hearing is the mask going to trap chemical vapors against my face? So thus far, our response to this has been to remind people about the hierarchy of controls. For managing chemical vapors, if it's getting to your mask, it's getting into your lungs. So let's work on controlling the source, right? The backstop to that for people who aren't satisfied with that answer is our provision for the use of, face shields, which can help as well. But we really want to talk to people about why they think they're having a chemical vapor exposure. What else? Well, glasses fogging is an issue. Maybe we'll save that for later in the Q&A because I want to get to the other concern that's been expressed, which is what about accidental chemical or biological contamination of the mask? And that, of course, is an issue with anything you're wearing in the lab. I think we can expect that people are going to make mistakes and touch their masks with dirty gloves. So we recommend having a spare available or knowing where to get one so it can quickly and easily be swapped out if that happens. This also relates to maybe a controversial question about whether the masks worn inside the lab should be allowed to leave the lab. We have not, as of yet, published any specific recommendations or restrictions on this. I am personally, I am of the opinion that if your face area is contaminated, or if your face mask area is touching things outside the lab, you probably have some other things you need to worry about. We don't ask people to wash their faces when they leave the lab. We don't ask them to shave their beards. So I don't think that they would need to swap out the mask, and yet it's not an official policy. I don't think there's anything wrong with people doing that for any personal comfort reasons. But it's just my rationale for why I don't think we need to be mandating or trying to enforce that.
Great, that's fantastic. I think that these face mask issues are a really large concern for everybody, to the extent that we're going to actually ask you a question in a little while to all of our attendees about whether or not you'd like to see maybe an even webinar specifically on that. And before we move on to our next question for our panelists, I just wanted to remind everybody that you can ask questions in the Q&A, and that will help us organize and triage how we answer the questions at the end of the webinar. And I'd also encourage everybody to go through, and as you're reading, for questions that you're interested in hearing the answer to, click that little thumbs up button. And that is going to help get the answers or the questions that you're particularly interested in rising to the top, and we'll be using those to help make sure we're addressing what people want to hear with the highest priority. Getting on to Craig, a quick question for you. How do you know that you have considered all the main issues that must be considered when you're putting together these plans? You know, of course, that classic, I think, Art or Chef's question as well of when do you know the dish is complete and you need to stop adding things?
All right, thank you. I wanted to add just a couple points to Kimi's great comments there about face masks, and that is that in the city of Los Angeles and County, we are required to wear face masks right now. But independent of that, since the employer, in this case UCLA, is going to mandate face masks on campus, that means the employer must provide the face masks, even though everyone already has one. So we are looking at providing that. So then that raises questions of how do you distribute the masks? Because if you have thousands of researchers coming on campus, they can't really go to one room to try and get face masks. So we're looking at a number of satellite distribution sites, and the university providing not only face masks, but other COVID-specific PPE. And also I just wanted to comment that, you know, the greatest challenge that all of us face is the uncertainty. And so many decisions are dependent on knowing something, but we have to make a decision, and then there's a cascade of subsequent decisions that are made. So I really congratulate everyone's hard work in this very difficult time. Okay, so getting back to the question, so how do we know that we've considered all the main issues that must be considered? Every one of the topics that we're going to talk about today has so many different facets to it, and how does any one campus know that they've addressed it? So specific to research ramp up, I work on a very focused committee. There's only about 12 people looking at the research ramp up, but it is a campus-wide committee. We have representation from across campus, but we also seek extensive consultation from other committees and other groups. And our Vice Chancellor for Administration has created a number of excellent working teams. And there's actually, you know, one committee specifically looking at physical distancing measures. So that way, the committee is looking at ramping up teaching, the committee is looking at ramping up research, can refer to information provided by this committee looking at physical distancing. In addition, we do what everyone should do, and that is crowdsource. And so not only is UCLA working on all these aspects, but we consult with the other 9 University of California campuses. But also there's just great communication between universities across the nation. So our Vice Chancellor for Research is on regular communication with a number of institutions from the APLU, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, and there's other organizations as well. So I think in terms of making sure you've covered the bases, the best thing you can do is look at documents provided by other institutions and scan them for things you might have missed. And I think that's a great way of making sure you've covered the bases. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And over to Jennifer for the last question before we begin our Q&A here. The question for you is, how do you plan to help your research community become more invested in their own safety? Could you please provide some specific details about any plans you have in place? You know, we know that right now safety culture really matters a lot more than ever, and I was wondering what you were doing specifically to kind of help foster that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's, well, one, I think that the research population at SDSU is very diverse, and biosafety is kind of like my wheelhouse. So one thing that I think like the benefit of this pandemic, I don't want to say it like that, but like one thing that's come out of this is that there really is this community mindset to safety, right? I think that our researchers are really astute and recognize that wearing face coverings protects the community, not necessarily yourself. And I think that there's also this perception, this realization that with our stay-at-home orders and so minimal work being done on campus right now, that being on campus and research labs, all of that is really a privilege at this point. I think that there's a lot of our researchers and the general public is really thirsty for training and knowledge. So I've seen like an uptick in biosafety training, in lab safety training, in PPE, hierarchy of controls, exposure and infection training that people are taking on our campus. But I really think that this pandemic has really shown everyone like how immersed in our community we are. So as I think as Kimi mentioned, that people who aren't going to be able to follow those rules will be revoked access. I think that that's really prominent on our campus as well, is that if there's like an outbreak, as when we restart research, there's an outbreak, it's not just one person, it's not just one lab, it's really reverting our entire operations back to phase one. And that's pretty scary as people have already lost so much time to perform their work. So that being said, like, what are we doing as an institution to kind of get people invested in their own safety? I think as many other institutions are doing, there will be a COVID-related training for each person returning back to campus, whether they're an office worker, a researcher, our custodians, all of that. There will be, so that we're just all on the same page about what the disease transmission is, about what our policies are, what our expectations are of the people coming back to campus. And then we're also, you know, as we're encouraging social distancing, there's going to be a lot less interaction. So we're really trying to communicate to our researchers that we're putting a lot of responsibility on them. You know, they will be responsible for calling in those hazardous and biohazardous waste pickups, that they're responsible for disinfecting the touch points in their labs. We're going to provide them with those checklists. So one is like the research ramp-up checklist. We're also considering creating a checklist of like just between shifts, between people. These are the things that you need to do in order to maintain safety, because it's like, you know, the people that are in the lab right now and then the people who are following up. We've built, we're planning on having signs on the floor that indicate directional flow of the building, so that you enter in one, you exit through another, to decrease the likelihood of people coming across each other. And we've built, we've set up social distance mock labs so that our researchers can understand what 6 feet of distance looks like, so that our researchers and our faculty and administration can understand what 250 square feet per person looks like. So the more that we can get into this mindset of this is the new normal, this is what it feels like to be so sparsely distance between people, then people can become aware of like what it's like when people are very close to them, because we're social creatures, we gravitate towards each other. So having some sense of awareness of what the distance is supposed to look like, we're hoping all of that combined will help our researchers, our staff, our folks at SDSU take, like, you know, be really safe and be in that mindset.
Great. I love that. Oh. Sorry, give me one quick second here. I'm just going to jump in quickly to launch something, and then it sounded like there was a response to that. First, wanted to say I love that idea of mock labs. That's the first time I've encountered it. And I think giving people that reality of this is what 6 feet looks like and training that into your perception is just really useful. So before we go on and move on to our Q&A portion, I wanted to go ahead and launch a quick poll here. So these are the community connection webinars. The goal here is really to keep them going and to have them serve your needs. We want to know what topics you'd like to have coming up, what you're most interested in, what you'd like to see, if there are any other ideas, and then also whether you'd be interested in being a panelist. I think the biggest limiting factor to having these continue in the future is running out of panelists here. So if you have a subject you're interested in, if you have a topic, if you'd like to get up here and speak and share your ideas, please go ahead and respond, and I can reach out to you and we can try and get something set up. And again, before we move on, in addition to thumbs upping and liking the things that you think want to get answered in Q&A, you can also respond to each other's conversations and provide your own answers or provide your own follow-up or context. And that is a great way to have good conversations about questions that may not get addressed during this webinar or things you particularly want to know more about. And does anybody have a quick response to Jen's comment before we move on to the live Q&A portion? Okay, great. Well, then with that, we can go ahead and get started. The first question here is from Lemomi. I'm sorry, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly here. This one is for Craig. She wanted to know what your plans were for handling teaching labs and providing for physical distancing.
All right, thank you for the question. I'm actually on yet another committee that's dealing with activity classes. And so not only laboratories, but performance classes, studio classes, and other types of classes that we call activity classes. We also have classes that require people to go out into the community and do surveys and interactions with community members of the community. And so it's actually a much more complex task. So for handling this, UCLA has already decided that for summer session, where we actually have 2 sections during the summer, those are still going to be 100% remote. So we're not doing any live classes. For the fall, we're at this point planning to have all the large classes be online, discussion sections online, office hours online, and then try to have a hybrid plan for classes that involve activities. So that means we would be trying to have lab classes live on campus starting in the fall. And so in terms of physical distancing, there's all sorts of different options. One option is to triple the number of lab sections if you have the person power, and then you could have reduced density. Another possibility is to have a subset of the class show up, and so they can do some of the experiments live, and then they would watch the other subset of experiments via live video feeds. And so that way, we wouldn't necessarily have every student doing all, say, 10 labs, but some of the students would be, every student would be doing some of the labs, and they could watch the other ones via video conferencing. So, and there's a couple other possibilities as well.
Yeah, this gets back to a point that Jonathan Klain made in our last webinar, to make a distinction between pure social distancing, but also social separation, and using time as a really valuable resource to make sure that people can inhabit the same place without interacting with each other. But again, before we get on to our next question, I wanted to give a quick plug to our upcoming webinars. So in addition to the next 2 that we have coming on, we have a brand new one that should be available live right now for your registration. This one is going to be all about safety culture and trust, preparing for on-site repopulations. Safety culture is really critical as a need right now, and we want to actually dive into how you can establish that, grow it, nurture it, and shape it into something that will truly protect people's lives as they go back together. And let me just go ahead and pull back the curtain again here, and we can share our panelists as we take a look at these upcoming webinars. And great, so next question up here we have from Joshua. This is to the full panel, so whoever would like to answer. Where are the square footage recommendations coming from? So I think we've been hearing 250 square feet quite a lot, and just wondering where that might be happening.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I quickly give some points from UCLA. So everyone talks about the 6 feet distancing, but if you think about people working in a room, that actually doesn't provide enough spacing. So imagine a modest size room, say someone's bedroom that's 12 by 12, 144 square feet. You could put 4 people in that if they weren't moving around, and have them each, have 6 foot separation. So, but that's really way too many people in the room. And also, if you think about 6 feet separation as a circle drawn around a person, then it's a radius of 3 feet per person. So that means you're talking about 30 square feet per person. So the six foot distancing really doesn't work, because you're talking about 30 square feet per person. So a number of different institutions have sort of optimized on the 250 square feet as sort of a compromise, and that would allow for movement within labs. But we further differentiate that, and when we talk about labs, oftentimes there's bays. And so what we say is it would be 1 person per bay. And then another thing about the 250 square feet is that if you think about labs that have refrigerators and freezers and centrifuges and benches and hoods, there's actually far less open square footage. So, but just to make the calculation easy, we talk about the total square footage of the lab and then divide it into 250 square foot blocks.
Great. Does that sound about where everybody else has come to that number as well?
Yeah, we're not making square footage recommendations at an institution level. So the plans for how the distancing is going to be accomplished is part of the school's plan. So if they choose a square footage, they can, but it's much more performance based because, even if you have 2 people in a large lab, if the 2 pieces of equipment and the 2 workstations are right next to each other, that's not helpful. So we haven't actually applied any of those numbers at this point.
And at SDSU, we're still working out the details of our plan, but we're making a recommendation of 250 square feet. We want to give PIs a general outline of what, like, if there's 250 square feet, this is how many folks that you can have, and then we'll adjust it based on like the number of bays, the outline of the lab, and that's something that they will be asked to identify in their operations plan.
Great. So speaking of operations, there's one question here about air exchange rates. I know this has been a concern in terms of managing HVAC, anticipating that, but also the changes that come with HVAC setups when you suddenly have a lot of people in a building propping open doors, maybe because they want to avoid opening them or opening windows. Are there any plans for using air exchange as a solution for some of these long-term plans?
So I've heard some good discussions that one must be careful about air exchanges and their effect. And initially, I thought that it would be great working in a lab with a lot of hoods because you're sucking out so much air that it would be able to reduce bioparticles floating around the air. But other people have pointed out that the ventilation systems create a lot more movement of the air. So actually a 6-foot separation might be less effective in a lab where there's a lot of air velocity due to air exchanges.
Yeah, there's, we don't have any plans to ramp up air exchanges or anything like that. And we did, I think, just issue something about not propping open doors because of, trying to maintain correct balance and pressure. I think people were concerned about touching doorknobs there. But there's an excellent article, and I'm sure I have the link handy, so maybe I'll put it in the chat if that's the right place, about, and this was from a professor at UMass Dartmouth, about the risks of the respiratory exposure. And the upshot was that the biggest risk is when you have people indoors with poor air exchange. And so even though laboratories do have a lot of movement of air and air mixing, it's also a function of the time in which you're exposed as well. So if that air is 100% exhausted from the laboratory, theoretically it's also being removed quickly as well. And unless you're standing right next to someone for a long time, your risk is going to be reduced. So this article that I'll share the link to, it's not specific to laboratories, but I just thought even for some of our populations of people we're communicating with, it's very accessible and yet scientifically grounded. So I'll share that.
Great, thank you. And hopefully we can go ahead and collect all of these useful links and information and provide those to you after the webinar around the same time that the recording gets posted. And Michael, a question for you here, because I know you were talking about manufacturing your own PPE and taking advantage of some of those maker spaces you had. There's one question that Stacy had about researchers anticipating PPE supply chain issues. Are you going to permit the reuse of disposable PPE, and under what, and which kinds and under what conditions? And I know that in that whole vein, there are some concerns that, during this ramp up and this really beginning of the exponential growth of this coronavirus crisis, people may have gone through and raided laboratories and laboratory spaces for chemicals used to make, viral disinfectants, hand sanitizers, masks, gloves. People weren't there and you need PPE when it happens. So I guess to tack onto that, do you have any plans in case somebody returns to a space and then all of a sudden something they're expecting to be present isn't present?
Yeah, we're definitely in that boat of, we raided our College of Nursing PPE stash and confiscated it all so that our on-site clinic could have what they needed. And so, yeah, we're definitely working through those issues of, working with vendors to get the PPE, because there are supply chain issues as everybody is experiencing. And so we have identified a local company that will be helping us with, sanitizing our N95s. And so we're continuing to investigate those options of, can we reuse PPE, what PPE can we get, and working through that. So we did actually with some internal resources start making cloth-based coverings internally and face shields. And so we've already produced about 6,000 cloth-based coverings, and we've distributed over 3,000 to employees, and we're looking to distribute more as the summer progresses and into the fall. And so our goal is to be able to provide all students and all staff with a face mask of either one that's made internally or purchased. But we're definitely running into those issues, and we're looking at those options for reuse. Our College of Fine Arts has been awesome because they have a bunch of sewing machines and they know how to sew quickly, and so they've been pumping them out.
Great. Here looks like another question at the top of the queue here. If an employee is working in a room or lab, what is the recommended time frame between the next employee to physically work in that same room? Is there any data or information that you've used on the safety of shared spaces and the time frame between scheduling the next employee? And I know we haven't gotten to this because there's probably enough time there to talk about another hour of disinfecting, contact tracing, all of that joy, but regular disinfection, anything like that, if you'd like to speak to recommended times between employees using the same room or equipment and procedures in between, that would be great.
We had someone ask this question, and our answer was there's no minimum time that we're mandating in between. I won't go into our disinfection, before and after use and shift protocols there, but we do have guidance for that's expected to be carried out. And then similar to the previous conversation about air exchanges, which is actually what the lab asked, like, what are the air exchanges? How long do we have to wait? And the answer was, you really don't. As long as things are staggered, so you don't have a lot of people leaving and showing up at the same time, we're not requiring that.
And one of the ways of achieving low density is to have shifts of workers. And so you're going to have a constant exchange of people through the lab. But I agree with Kimi that we can't specify a downtime between shifts. And so the idea is to have sanitization of commonly used items, but also in some of the labs, people wear gloves and hopefully they're not touching their face while using the gloves, and that might reduce contamination of some of the shared instruments.
Great. Craig, I believe there was a question that you had marked down to answer earlier, although I'm not sure if we had already gotten to that one yet. Let me just take a quick look here, and in that meantime, I can go ahead and find another one. This was one from, looks like Erica, asking about internal EHS business practices. What have you adjusted for when staff are interacting with researchers during ramp up, be it for inspections, check-ins, etc.? Jennifer, I think kicking it over to you for this one would be great, considering the kind of involvement with student safety and culture.
Yeah, one thing that we've kind of identified is we can't just pop into labs anymore. We definitely are notifying every lab before we go over there. When we were doing these research pods inspections, we notified the entire department, said we will be here between this time and this time. And we really had to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that we hit all the labs during those specific times, because we really do want to minimize that physical distancing. I think one thing that we were really surprised to learn too is that so many of our conversations can be managed over Zoom. So like we've gotten I don't know if EHS collectively is like this, but we're a little tech averse, and we've adapted really well and really quickly, and I'm really impressed and applaud everyone who is kind of going through that right now. But really, that's probably the biggest change that we've made, is that we're not popping in and doing surprise inspections anymore. And we are definitely notifying everyone. And then we also kind of, as we're going these research pause inspections, is like, hey, if you want us to check on anything, since you can't be in here, let us know. And that's been received really well too.
Great. And just a quick note here. So we are officially at 4 p.m. There's so many more questions, and I think that we can keep going for another 15 minutes or so to answer some more of these. But of course, our panelists signed up for the hour, and feel free to drop off if you need to. And we appreciate all of your time here and all the work and the advice that you've been giving.
Matt, I put on real clothes today, so I'm here for another 15 minutes. Let's, maximize it.
All right.
I'm as well.
I am going to run. I have like a 5-year-old who is begging for lunch. So thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jen. We really appreciate it. And looking forward to maybe getting a few of those materials from you if you're able to share them.
Definitely will. I'll send them to you, Matt.
Great. So we have one question here from Larry asking about any of the panelists. If you put together a committee who has been invited to be part of the committee, sorry, maybe I'll rephrase it, say it a little better. Who has been invited to be a part of the committee and how is the process working out? And then part 2 of that is asking about whether any plans have been released to the research community and how they've been received. So it sounds like this question about working together on putting these plans together, and then also the second part of sharing them out.
So on the committee that I serve on for research ramp up, it's a pretty high level committee. So we have the Vice Chancellor for Research and then various associate deans or associate deans from across campus, the dean for the School of Medicine, dean from School of Engineering, and someone from the graduate school overseeing graduate students and postdocs. So a pretty high level committee and people that are very knowledgeable of the institution. I think that's key.
Great. And Tracy had a question here about handling reduced staffing to create social distancing in laboratories. She said that there are several people who are talking about having their staff come in half and half, half some days, half on other days, but that might cause a lot of additional risk rather than choosing certain people to come in regularly. Is that a concern that you're looking at, or is this something where you're just looking more at the time in the space versus the populations that are moving back and forth between it?
Yeah, I have some comments on that. Actually, the checklist that Shima's putting together has, I think, a pretty good treatment of this, but some of it is in our PEN checklist for resumption of research. And some of the things that I think I have seen missing maybe from some institutions, topics are anticipating some of the issues with reduced staffing. And I'm just trying to find the page right now so that I can accurately quote myself. But one of the things that comes to my mind is the fact that you may have certain tasks that people are the subject matter experts in, or pieces of equipment where they are the steward of that equipment. And from a safety standpoint, and just from a operational standpoint, coordinating that, cross-training on that, or having the contact information available on that is something that's going to have to be considered. And then also the training and supervision aspect, I think, is a big one. Early on, we're probably not going to have a lot of very green researchers coming back to the lab. But my thing I keep coming back to is it really doesn't matter how seasoned you are if you're doing something that is high hazard and you've never done it before. And normally there would be others around that you can consult who have that knowledge. They may not be there. So I think that needs to be discussed early as what are we going to restrict from being done because of the reduced staffing.
I also wanted to add one thing that we're doing at UCLA, and maybe other institutions are doing as well, and that is people have talked about monitoring people's temperature as they come into a building or other types of rapid monitoring. And we've set up a online symptom monitoring system. And we are requiring every single person who comes on campus at this particular time and in phase 2 to do a daily check-in onto this monitoring system. They have to fill it out and then they get an approval to come to campus. And so that symptom monitoring addresses a number of factors beyond just temperature. And so that's what we're doing instead of having people at the door with a thermometer.
Do they have to prove they have approval? Like, do they have to show their app?
If they're queried, then they have to show the approval, and that shows up on their phone.
We also looked at the temperature, taking temperatures as people come to work or go into classrooms, and we've opted to not do that. But we are looking at like purchasing disposable temperature and strips that we can hand out to students as a way to encourage them to self-monitor, among other aspects. But we're still kind of exploring those options as well.
Great. So I think with our remaining time, this seems like a really big and important topic that we haven't touched on as much as I'd like to. So let's talk about disinfection and routine disinfection, and also these unfortunate cases where somebody may have tested positive and then you need to do more of a deep clean. So if all of you could speak to what plans you have in place, procedures, who will be disinfecting, technologies, that would be great to hear your thoughts. And Michael, if you'd like to kick us off there.
Yeah, so we're obviously, our facilities department is typically the one primarily responsible for doing all the cleaning and disinfecting on campus, including classrooms and labs. But now we're kind of moving more to a model of we're all in this together. And so we're actually going to be providing cleaning supplies and disinfecting supplies for labs and classroom spaces, and getting students to participate and clean between classes. We'll see how successful we are, but really that's the goal of trying to change that culture to where we all got to do our part to protect each other. And so that's one aspect of it. We're also looking at electrostatic sprayers and other means to disinfect touch points more quickly, and that's part of it.
Yeah, the first thing we did in establishing our disinfectant guidance is to make sure we established what housekeeping was going to be responsible for and what the lab personnel were going to be responsible for. So for us, the housekeeping's doing everything outside the door of the lab, and the lab personnel are doing everything inside, including offices and desk spaces. We're requiring shared equipment be disinfected before and after use, and then saying that there should be signage to remind people and the disinfectant supplied at the point of use, and also keep in mind that there needs to be somewhere to throw away wipes and things like that. We give examples of high touch areas that are not necessarily shared equipment, but need to be disinfected at the start of and partway through every shift. So that's routine. Confirmed and suspected is different. I think the big difference is that in confirmed cases, we're actually going to bring in an outside vendor to do a thorough decontamination. We're not going to shut down the building, but the access to the lab will be restricted. And then for just suspected cases, housekeeping will do enhanced cleaning anywhere in the building where the person may have gone, or areas they would have used. And then the lab personnel are given instructions for how to do enhanced cleaning within the lab.
Great. And then one just quick follow-up question.
I would echo those same comments, but just add one last thing, and that is our campus is going to be giving out sanitization supplies to individual research groups. So in addition to handing out the face masks, they'll be handing out sanitizing sprays, wipes, etc., to the research groups.
Great. And then in terms of communicating about these instances where you may find that a space has been exposed to somebody who tested positive for coronavirus, do you have any plans in place to let people know immediately, in a few days, what your plans are to maybe cordon that area off, just to make sure that when you're decontaminating something, avoids having more people go into it?
I don't know specific plans, but we do have a separate work group looking at signage issues. And so they might have some plans, but I can't speak to that specifically.
Yeah, I know what we're doing, just to the level that if there is a confirmed case, that there would be restricted access, which I think would immediately notify some people as soon as the access is restricted. And on our campus, our office is taking responsibility right now for contact tracing for any confirmed cases at Penn. And so we would be notified right away to start following up on that. But I don't know the specifics of notifying those who are in the area, other than that they would be contacted for contact tracing reasons.
Yeah, and we've kind of worked through a little bit of this. We actually have had some positive cases on campus, and so we've worked through some of these issues where we do make immediate notification and then do contact tracing. And so basically that is our plans, to do immediate notification and communication as well. So mass communication, and then do the contact tracing, notify those individuals. And then obviously we quarantine and isolate. We've set up isolation quarantine rooms, and we've developed that plan. And so the best bet's always to communicate quickly and often.
Yep. Specific to contact tracing, we're ramping up a very significant program there to have dozens of people ready to execute contact tracing. So we do have the advantage of being a large institution. So we have a School of Medicine, School of Nursing, and School of Public Health, and we're using students and people within those institutions to create a trained work group who can do contact tracing.
Yeah, having resources ready in the wing for when these things potentially flare up sounds like a great idea, especially I think as we found with the initial growth of coronavirus. And if you find out after a couple of weeks or days that suddenly things are spreading a lot more quickly, it could be very easy to find yourself overwhelmed with more contact tracing than maybe you had the capacity for. So having just a game plan in that situation of, the reserve people getting more man hours instead of having to scramble at the time you need it to also find people seems like a great idea. And this also gets to a part of this webinar that I really like, which is this is not a place to have all the answers, right? It's a discussion, and we want to hear from you, our attendees, about your plans and your ideas. So if any of you have thoughts about what you're doing to communicate in the event of a positive result, make sure that people stay out of spaces, any signage you're working on, any communication plans, ideas for contact tracing, we'd love to hear those and get those shared out to everybody else. And before we go, with just the kind of minute left here, are there any other questions that you all had that you'd like to sort of speak to, or anything that you feel you'd really like to share with our audience? All right.
I would like to maybe just point out that I'm kind of new to the university space. My background's been, I was in semiconductor manufacturing most of my career, and then came over to higher ed. So it's been a steep learning curve, and I've found that Shishima has been a great resource. And also the Kimi's website, the University of Pennsylvania, I'm on there every day actually looking at her material, and it's a lifesaver. So I've been very
impressed. Material, but it's our office's material.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's awesome material, and I've just found the community to be very helpful. So I think if you reach out, there's help there. So I'd encourage everyone to continue to do that. It's a great community.
I would just add that it's really important to have everyone buy in to doing the right thing. And so it's very challenging for thinking about trying to control people's behavior. A lot of us deal with research laboratory safety, separate from COVID-19. And so getting people to do the right things throughout their work day is critical. And so we need to do things in a way that encourages people to take the right actions, to have the right behaviors. I know our EH&s is planning to do spot checks, but they really don't want to be the lab police. They want to be collaborators in promoting a positive work environment. And so it's really important that all of us have messaging for our institutions that encourage people to do the right thing rather than trying to take the stick approach.
Agreed. I think there are so many different factors that go into behaviors and policies and practices, and I keep coming back time and time again to the basics of why are we here and what are we trying to accomplish, and focusing on protecting and supporting each other, and when in doubt, just going to that and to risk assessment and the basics of hazard control, and then all the rest kind of falls in line with that.
Great. Fantastic. Well, a big round of applause and thank you for our panelists today. And really appreciate all of your work and time in putting this together. Thank you everybody for showing up. Really look forward to having you on some of our future webinars. We've got those live and registrationable, if that's a word, on our homepage, and we'd love to see you for these going forwards. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us either at webinars@bioraft.com. We've got a form on the site that you can fill out if you'd like to be a panelist or you have an idea for a webinar. And with that, I will say goodbye and release everybody back to the workday. And thank you for all of your time. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.